Most lead magnets on travel advisor websites don't actually do anything. And when I look at why, it's not because the concept of a lead magnet is flawed. It's that the standard advice about what to build doesn't account for the specific position travel advisors are in. Here's the problem. Travel information isn't scarce. There's no shortage of destination guides, packing lists, trip planning articles, cruise overviews, resort roundups. Every major publication, every airline, every OTA, every travel blog has already produced the generic version of whatever comprehensive resource you'd put together. If you create a complete guide to visiting Japan and offer it as a lead magnet, you're competing with the New York Times, Condé Nast, National Geographic, and several thousand travel bloggers. That's not a competition you can win on volume or production value. The standard lead magnet advice, create a valuable resource, make it comprehensive, trade it for an email, that was built for industries where useful information is genuinely hard to find. A financial advisor creating a retirement planning guide is offering something that's difficult to find in clear, useful form. A travel advisor creating a guide to any major destination is competing with content that exists in overwhelming abundance. The model breaks down. What actually works is different. It's more specific, more opinionated, and more closely connected to what you personally know from actual experience. Not travel information, your judgment about travel. That distinction is the whole thing. There are 5 types of lead magnets that consistently work for travel advisors. And the thing they have in common is that none of them could have been written by someone who doesn't know the specific territory. I call them the 5 expert offers, because what you're trading in each case isn't information. It's the expertise you've earned. You can only write them well if you've been there, sent clients there, and paid attention to what actually matters. The 5 are the decision guide, the planning guide, the readiness checklist, the questions guide, and the insider take. I'll walk through all 5, what each one does, why your version is the only version that works, and then get into what the follow-up sequence looks like. The download is only the beginning of the system. Let me describe what it looks like when a lead magnet is actually doing its job. A couple has had Japan on the list for years. It started as one of those trips you mention when people ask about bucket list travel. Japan is on there someday. And now someday is starting to feel like it could actually happen. The kids are a bit older. There's a window in the spring that might work. They've started talking about it as a real thing instead of as a hypothetical. So they begin researching seriously. And what they find is that Japan is genuinely complex to plan in a way most destinations aren't. The question of how much ground to cover versus slowing down and going deep, the logistics of getting between cities on the rail system, what cherry blossom season actually involves in terms of booking lead times and crowd levels, whether it even makes sense to try to optimize for cherry blossoms on a first trip, or whether that's a mistake for someone who hasn't been before. The usual travel content doesn't get them where they need to be. It lists the things to see and the things to eat. It doesn't help them understand how the trip actually works. Then they find something on a travel advisor's website, a download called something like what first-time visitors to Japan need to figure out before they start booking. They grab it. It's 8 pages. It addresses the planning questions they've been sitting with in a direct, clear way. When to go based on what they actually want from the trip. How to think about coverage versus depth. What the logistics of getting around are really like when you don't read Japanese. The booking timing mistake that catches most first-time visitors off guard. At the end, if you're ready to start putting this together and would like to talk through the specifics, here's how to get on my calendar. They're not ready yet, but they're closer. They sign up, they get a couple of follow-up emails over the next few weeks that keep being useful in the same specific way. And 2 months later, when the spring window moves from theoretical to real, they book a call with her. Not with an OTA, not after spending another hour in a forum thread trying to piece something together from strangers. With her, because she's been in their inbox and she's been the most consistently useful voice in all the research they've done. That's a lead magnet doing exactly what it's supposed to do. What made it work isn't that she created something comprehensive, it's that she created something specific enough to be genuinely useful at that moment, and that only she could have written with real knowledge behind it. The decision guide is a short document that helps someone choose between 2 specific options, cruise line A versus cruise line B. ocean cruising versus river cruising, an all-inclusive versus an independent itinerary in the same region, this island versus that island for a particular kind of trip. What makes this work as a lead magnet is that it fills a gap nothing else fills. Someone comparing two cruise lines isn't going to find an honest, useful comparison on either cruise line's website. Both of them are making the case for themselves. General travel media tends to say carefully neutral, which means the content ends up vague and inconclusive. But an advisor who genuinely knows both options, who has sent clients on both and heard how it went, they can tell you clearly who each one tends to be right for, what the meaningful differences are in actual practice, and which question to ask yourself to clarify the decision. The person searching for that comparison is also close to booking. They've already narrowed down from thinking about travel to choosing between these two specific things. That's a warmer potential client than someone browsing inspiration content. A decision guide that reaches them at that moment is starting a relationship at almost the best possible point. What makes a decision guide work versus just another document is being willing to take a position. Both options have their merits, and it depends on your preferences is not useful. Everyone already knows that, and it's why they're still searching. What the person reading it wants is someone with real knowledge to say, here's how I actually think about this. Here's who each option tends to be better for. Here's the question I'd ask to help you figure out which direction makes sense. That's a document someone downloads and uses. The hedged version is a document someone skims and closes. For a cruise line specialist, it might be how to choose between the mainstream cruise lines for a first ocean cruise. What actually differentiates them in terms of what the experience feels like day to day, not just what's on each brochure. For a luxury travel advisor, it might be how to think about a small ship cruise versus a custom land itinerary for a milestone trip. For family specialists, it could be which Disney destination makes sense for which ages and what the real differences are in practice. The format is the same. The content is what only you can write well because you've actually seen how it plays out. Now, a planning guide is focused less on choosing between options and more on helping someone understand what's actually involved in planning the kind of trip you specialize in. The first-time cruiser guide is the most common version of this that I've seen work consistently, and it works because first-time cruising has a genuine learning curve. There's a lot to understand before you even know what the right questions are, how embarkation actually works, how to think about shore excursions versus staying on the ship, what the difference between the included dining room and specialty restaurants means in practice, how gratuities work and when they're baked in versus added later, what travel insurance applies to a cruise specifically. Someone planning their first cruise has a set of things they need to understand before they start booking that they often don't know that they need to understand yet. A planning guide walks them through it clearly, saves them the hour they'd otherwise spend in forums trying to piece together reliable information from conflicting advice written by strangers. That same logic applies everywhere. A guide to planning a first safari, what to know before you start looking at camps, lodges, and how self-drive versus guided plays out on the ground. A guide for couples thinking about a destination wedding who don't know what the planning process actually involves at each stage. A guide to multi-generational travel and how to structure a trip when you're bringing together different ages, different physical abilities, and genuinely different ideas of what a vacation should look like. The format doesn't need to be ambitious. 5 to 8 pages focused on the specific things someone at that planning stage is actually sitting with. Written the way you'd explain it to someone on the phone. Not like a brochure trying to sound official. The value is in the clarity, not the length. Next, we have the readiness checklist. A checklist works when the specificity signals real experience. That's what separates a useful one from the generic versions that already exist everywhere. What's a pack for a beach vacation is not interesting because it's been done 10,000 times. But specific preparation lists for specific trip types can be genuinely useful when what's on the list could only have come from someone who's actually done that kind of travel repeatedly. What experienced Alaska cruisers always say they wish they thought to bring that first-timers don't. What to sort out at home before a multi-country trip so the logistics don't become a problem in week 2. What Japan travelers consistently say they wish they'd understood about cash and connectivity before landing. Those aren't lists anyone could write. They come from experience and from paying close attention to what actually matters. That specificity does 2 things at once. It's practically useful. The person who downloads it is going to actually use it. And it tells the reader something about you before you've made any explicit claims about your background. A checklist that contains things you'd only know from real experience with that trip type signals that this advisor has been there, sent clients there, and paid attention. It does credibility work without having to assert anything. There's also a practical advantage. A checklist has a low bar to consume. Someone downloads a planning guide and might save it to read over the weekend. A checklist is immediately usable. That low friction to actually use it also lowers the friction to download it, which matters for how many people actually opt in. Now, the questions guide is probably the most underused of the 5, and it might be the most interesting strategically. The idea is a short document, something like the questions worth asking a travel advisor before you book a cruise, or what to ask before you start planning a safari, or the questions I'd ask if I were vetting destination wedding coordinators. It's positioned as something that helps someone feel more prepared before they have a real planning conversation. The counterintuitive part is that you're handing potential clients a list of questions they're then going to ask you. But look at what it actually does. It demonstrates expertise before any conversation happens. The only way to produce a list of genuinely useful questions is to understand what the right answers look like, which means knowing what matters, what people get wrong, and what distinguishes a strong answer from a weak one. That's a credential. It signals that you're comfortable being evaluated. You're not steering around scrutiny, you're inviting it. That's a different kind of confidence than an advisor who hedges everything and hopes the client doesn't ask too hard. It pre-educates the potential client. By the time someone has read through a list of good questions, they've already learned something about what the relevant considerations are, the things that matter, the things that trip people up, what a thoughtful answer sounds like versus deflection. They arrive at any consultation more informed. That actually makes your conversation more productive, not less. And there's something a little bit clever happening that's worth naming. A guide called Questions to Ask a Travel Advisor Before Booking is implicitly prompting the person reading it to go find a travel advisor to ask. You're the one who gave them the questions. You're the first advisor they'll think of when they're ready to use them. The 5th type, the insider take, has the highest ceiling, and it's the most natural fit for advisors who have genuine depth in a specific destination or trip category. The concept is a destination-specific guide, but done at a level of specificity and honesty that general travel content doesn't reach. Not top things to do in the Greek islands, something more like an honest look at the Greek islands. Which ones are worth the logistics, and which ones are mostly running on reputation at this point. Not planning your first trip to Italy, something like what I've watched first-time Italy visitors consistently get wrong and what I'd tell them to do differently. The framing matters a lot. What I tell my clients before they book the Maldives is more interesting as a lead magnet than Maldives travel guide because it's promising something specific. Access to what someone who's been there and sent clients there actually thinks, not curated information. That's a different kind of document. This only works when what's in the document is genuinely yours, your observations, your actual opinions. Things that might gently contradict what's commonly said based on what you've seen firsthand. An advisor who's done multiple fam trips to a region, who's inspected ships across cruise lines, who's sent enough clients to a destination to know what consistently surprises them, they have the material for this. The version to avoid writing is this type of guide for somewhere you've visited once and are supplementing with what you've read. When it's done well, it does 2 things simultaneously. It's useful to someone planning that specific trip, and it's a credential. It demonstrates knowledge at a level that an about page can't replicate. Someone reads it and genuinely understands that you've been there, not just literally, but in terms of understanding how it works at a level the guidebook doesn't reach. Now, let me put a few things in the other column. What doesn't work? Generic ebooks are the main one. Long, comprehensive documents on broad travel topics, the ultimate guide to planning any vacation, everything you could ever need to know about cruising in general. Those are too much to produce and too generic to reach the right person. Length doesn't create value. Specificity does. Discount or offer-based lead magnets don't fit travel advisory well. Your value isn't a lower price. It's expertise and judgment. If your lead magnet is a coupon, you're signaling work with me and you'll pay less. What you probably want to be signaling is work with me and you'll have a better trip. Those are very different value propositions, and the former tends to attract a different kind of client than you're after. Quizzes, Quizzes can work in the right situation, but the quality varies a lot depending on execution, and they require more setup than they look like. I wouldn't start there. What happens after the download? This is where a lot of advisors drop the ball, so it's worth saying directly. The lead magnet is only the first part of the system. When someone gives you their email to get your guide, you need to actually do something with that email. The guide delivers automatically through your email platform. And then what? At minimum, there should be a short follow-up sequence. Not aggressive, just a couple of emails that continue the conversation the download started. If someone downloaded your first-time cruiser guide, an email a few days later that surfaces something like, the 3 questions I get most often from people at this stage of planning, that's useful. It's not selling anything, it's extending what they already came for. Somewhere in that sequence, there should be a natural invitation to get on a call. Not book now, just something that acknowledges, if you're getting closer to actually planning this and would like to talk through the specifics, here's how to get on my calendar. That gives the people who are ready a clear path without pressuring the people who aren't. The long game is what makes the whole system worth building. Someone who signed up 6 months ago because they were starting to seriously think about Japan, then got busy and put it aside, some of those people are eventually going to actually plan that trip. If you've been showing up in their inbox with things that are genuinely useful, you're the person they think of when that moment arrives. That slow accumulation is real, and it happens without you doing anything once a sequence is built. And practically, the setup is less involved than it feels. You need the document, a PDF, a few pages, specific and genuinely useful. You need an email platform to deliver it automatically when someone submits their address. The free tier on something like MailerLite is more than enough to start, and the technical setup takes an afternoon. You need a form or a page on your site where someone enters their email to get it. And you need at least 2 or 3 follow-up emails drafted and loaded into the sequence. That's the whole system. The guide itself shouldn't become a big project. If you sit down to write your Japan planning guide and it's turning into something enormous, the scope is too broad. Pick the one specific question that comes up in almost every planning conversation you've had about that trip type. Answer it clearly and honestly. 5 to 8 pages is enough. The value is in what you actually know, not in the volume of it. And don't overthink the design. Clean formatting, your logo, readable fonts, some space between sections. It should look like someone made deliberate choices about how to present it. Not like it was knocked out in 10 minutes. That's all it needs to be. The content is the thing. The couple who downloaded the Japan planning guide and didn't book right away, they're still thinking about that trip. And when the window finally opens, the advisor they call is the one who's already been in their inbox being useful. Not the loudest one, not the one who ran the most ads, the one who gave them something worth holding on to before they were ready to ask for help. That's what this is actually for. Not quick wins, the relationship that starts before someone is ready and earns the call when they finally are. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. New episodes come out regularly, and that's the easiest way to stay in the loop. Stick around. I'm Justin Hinkle, and this is the Travel Advisor Website Show.